Well, folks, you're in for a treat today because we really have a wonderful, wonderful person here visiting our stage. We have Trish Jenkins all the way from Australia. And we have her up very early in the morning. Trish talks a lot on resiliency and leadership and change. So I'm going to turn the show over to Trish. We have a lot of beautiful points to bring out to you. Okay, Trish, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me on your show, Felicia. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
We're so happy to have you. And I know your time is precious, but you have such an illustrious theme in topics that you speak about. And I've seen your videos also on YouTube. And I mean, you are dynamic. You keep the audience moving. Every single testimonial said the same thing. You keep the focus of everybody in the audience. That's a talent. That's a gift in itself. So thank you.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Look, I think, I'm so passionate about what I speak about, resilience, change, and leadership. And especially now when the world is so topsy-turvy that people are stressed and they're busy and they're trying to lead teams. And it's hard, and they've got their own personal things going on with the pandemic, and they might have family that are sick. And, it's really important to be resilient and care for yourself. And as you go through challenging times, and, we all go through challenging times, it just happens that I have a story that some would consider more challenging than others. And I love to share that story, but more importantly, the things that I learned through that story that helped me to survive and come up again, that may be of use to other people in their challenges.
Yes, and for the audience sake, I'll say Trish has a very interesting story, so please stay posted. And Trish, perhaps you'd like to share a little bit on it, on how you fell into the topics of resiliency and leadership. What brought you to that path? It was a long journey.
I'd love to. So in 2009, I went to prison for 8 months.
Wow. That's great.
It was, I know, I don't look like someone who you would normally find. No, having that experience. No. I was working in a mutual fund for a boss. I was very professional. I had 20 years. At that time, I had 20 years of personal and professional development, business experience, working experience, customer service experience. I was in that world. But what I didn't know is that my boss was a crook and that he was stealing investors' money. Wow. He'd be the Australian version of your Bernie Madoff.
Wow.
You remember him? Yeah.
It's pretty big time.
It was, and I didn't know he was doing this. My role was to look after the clients and pay them their returns when they came in, which was monthly. And then suddenly it was a month where he couldn't pay. He said, "Oh, look, the market's doing this and that, and it wasn't guaranteed, but they were used to receiving the payments because it was what's known as a Ponzi scheme." Which is where the money coming in is used to pay people, and there is actually not much investment going on. So there's no actual gains, and eventually you need more money to feed to more people, and you just can't sustain it, and it implodes. I didn't know that's what was going on in the background, but my role was to say to people, me too, I had 104,000 in the fund. That was our retirement, Felicia.
Yeah, that's
so I fully believed him that we're not getting paid this month because of this and this. And that was hard, but that was my job. Second month comes around and it happens again. Well, that was harder. And people became more. Now, this is 2005, before I went to jail, of course. And that was harder. People asked for their money back, some of them, and they got it, which is reassuring. Of course, I didn't know it was other people's money they were being given.
Wow.
And then it continued, and my boss became harder to reach because I didn't go into an office. I was working independently as well. But he was getting harder to reach, and I was getting more phone calls from people who were scared and upset. And they began phoning, emailing, turning up at my home.
Wow. Oh, that's so haunting. Yes, and you have a family.
Talk about boundaries crossing.
Yeah.
Mm. asking, begging, demanding money, and becoming more and more aggressive. And in the meantime, my resilience was running out. My stress levels were running out. Anybody that I would have turned to get help from, to get advice from, had their money in. My accountant, who do I go to speak to about it?
That's right.
And when you are under extreme stress, and this is when today I talk to leaders about managing their stress and their self-care so that their decision-making is not impaired, because extreme stress impairs your decision-making ability. It's not an excuse. It's just how it is.
That's right. It's a fact. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so I couldn't take it anymore. And I said to him, look, there's money over here. Can I use that to pay people? They're desperate. He said, all right, do that. So I did. But that was not the correct way to make payments. And it was a misuse of funds. So even though I didn't steal it, I paid people with the wrong money. And that was a breach of the Corporations Act.
Wow. It fell on you. Yeah.
It was. And I put my hand up for that. I did do that. And if I could undo it, Felicia, I'm not one of these people who say I have no regrets. I've got plenty of them, and that's a big one.
Wow, I'm sure.
But that's right. And so somebody eventually went to the authorities, who contacted me to say, we need you to come and talk to us about this man. I said, all right then. And I said, look, this is what I know. This is what I actually did this to try and fix it. So can you tell me what to do to balance it up? Because I can replace that money from my mortgage. That would be fine. I'm happy to do that. Just tell me what to do. And thinking that they would advise me. And instead they just went, you did what?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So you didn't know what you stepped into. How would you know?
I really didn't. I mean, I knew it wasn't quite the right way to do things. I just didn't realize how serious it was.
Right.
And that is when everything got shut down. Assets were frozen. All our assets were, we went into a voluntary liquidation, lost everything, our houses, everything was sold up because we'd done pretty well. Mm-hmm. And then we were renting. And then I was prosecuted. And that took another year and a half. So eventually it was January 2009. I turned up for court to get my penalty, which could have been a fine.
Wow.
But you may remember 2008 was the global financial crisis.
Oh, yes. I remember that well. Huh?
So people were pretty touchy about finance, and I received the maximum, which was a custodial sentence. They call it a head sentence of 2.5 years to be suspended after 8 months. I got that suspension after 8 months because I pled guilty, because I did what I did. I didn't do what he did, but I did what I did. And that's when I had that adventure away from my husband and 3 little girls.
Wow.
I had to learn how to be resilient and cope in that situation.
So that explains a lot about your resiliency and your focus on that, because you had no choice. You had to change and move forward. So let's see how do you relate that to leaders in industry, for instance, or in any public company? I mean, the resiliency and leadership, but you had to lead yourself through all of that. So of course your resiliency grew day by day. You didn't know you had it in you. Thank God you did. And I think probably you healed even more afterwards, after it was over, because the immediate stress was relieved. But in doing that, what did you learn about yourself that you can share?
Yes, look, I was I was very aware of my environment and that my mental health was at risk. And I knew enough to take steps. Like, I didn't just drift along with it. I thought, this is big. I need to protect my mind and my emotions as much as I possibly can. And I think with leaders in industry, you don't have to go to prison to feel trapped and pressured.
Yeah, good point.
You can feel like the walls are closing in. You can feel like everybody's after you. You can feel like that you can trust no one, and it can become this big thing. And that's why it's important to take stock and say, okay, I need to take care of me first. A bit like when we used to fly, on the airlines, they'd say, put your mask on first.
That's it.
And as a leader as well, you can, particularly with men, Felicia, they can feel like they have to be the captain of the ship, and that means that they have to be invulnerable that they've got to be this strong, no weakness kind of leader, and they just muscle on through and get through and focus. But I want to give you some relief with that, fellas. If you can pull back and self-assess and say, okay, what do I need? Is there someone outside the organization, like maybe a men's group or something that you can go to and safely talk to, get some relief? Can you delegate? What are you doing? And women too tend to take on more than they're supposed to. We get so busy that our boundaries are weak. Yeah. So it's important. I have to understand your own personality type, because the type A's can be so controlling and in control that it's brittle.
That's right.
It is not sustainable. You need to have some humility. Come on now. You've got to have the humility to recognize that you're only human, because these people, if you are the captain of a ship, they are depending on you, but that's a good reason for you to pull back and self-care. You have to be honest with yourself. You can't just bluster your way through.
Right. Wow.
What do you need to get help with? And I got help. I saw a counselor to help with that. My faith was a big deal of that. It was turning, if you happen to have, I know we don't necessarily talk about faith in the corporate world, but if that is in your background, if that's something that helps you, there is no shame. There's nothing wrong with tapping into that part of whatever culture you have, relief and comfort and guidance. And find the treasure in the darkness. There are 3 questions that I learned to ask in a situation when it's overpowering or it's all too much. And one of them is, because usually it's related, it could be a problem with a person, it could be the circumstance, and sometimes it's how you see things. So I think it was Einstein who said the thinking that created the problem is not, like, you have to think at a different level for a solution. That's right. Than the problem it created. You can find the quote that says it better.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So in order to think differently about the problem, ask the question, how else can I see this person? How else could I see this person? How else could I see the situation? And how else could I show up for it? So be aware of what you're doing and also your patterns, because when we're under stress, we revert.
Right.
We revert to what we've learned. Mm-hmm. And you would see this in your counselling occupation, Felicia. You would see that when people get stressed, they lose their cool.
Yeah, we all do. Myself included.
Yeah, and that's why self-care is really important, to become self-aware and then become aware of, the circumstances and what else we can do.
Right. So for leaders, as you pointed out, are the captain of the ship of that company. Everyone's relying on a leader. So I imagine there's a lot of stress walking through different personalities that you're going to meet amongst your employees, and you're trying to get them to be as productive as possible. So you're saying the first thing a person should do, a leader should do, is take care of themselves and make sure they're in balance and they're in check.
Yes. It really is. And that's not through alcohol. Like in the old days, like the tradition is you have a few drinks to relax afterwards, and then those few drinks become a few drinks more. And it might not be alcohol, it might be something else, but you're not actually relaxing, you're avoiding.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
It's not healthy. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having a drink, but if that's your go-to, to relieve stress, I would invite you to consider other alternatives, even if it's maybe punching a boxing bag or something, where you can clear your mind rather than dull it, so that you can think. Going for a walk. Yeah. So I couldn't go for a walk in prison. I had to find other ways.
Yeah, that's not quite kosher.
Yeah. So you've got to find something else. You've got to and assess what you're doing, because some of us are so controlling that we won't give up control of what we're doing and delegate it to someone else. Oh, they won't do it the way I do it. Well, good. They might actually find another way and do it better. That's why you need diversity among your assistants.
Yeah.
And ask for help, ask for feedback. I read about a company during the lockdown, where they were going broke, and when other companies were sacking people, they actually went to it was a shoe company, I believe. They went to the staff and said, "What are your ideas? What can we do?"
Yeah, and that takes a brave leader to do that. Yes, to open up that whole can of worms. That's what you should do. That's a wise leader.
Well, it takes humility. And
Humility.
our Western society sees the authority as a hierarchy, whereas a leader is there to serve and empower the people that you lead, so that you bring out the best in them. It's a different way of looking at it. So you've got to think differently about it.
That's a good point. I fully agree with you. I've seen it myself. I've consulted in a lot of different buildings, and the atmosphere in each building is different. And you'll know why as soon as you meet the leader, whether he's an administrator or a manager or CEO or what. If there's very strict and rigid, you see that amongst the workers. If you see someone who's just in welcoming people, then you see that amongst the subordinates. But so yes, the leader sets the pace, and how he gives that example of humility and resilience, it carries over into his workers. So,
that's right. And women are the same, in the sense that like they might express it differently, but often female leaders feel like they have to be tough to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And I believe that's changing. And although many of them will not bring other female leaders up, they see them as a threat. So it's like they get to the top and then they pull the ladder up after them so that they can be the special one.
Yes.
And that's not healthy thinking either. That's not teamwork.
Yeah.
But understanding other people's hang-ups as well. As a leader, when you can understand your personality and the limitations it brings, as well as the blessings, then you can turn your attention to who is around you and thinking, well, that person is different to me. And there are books aplenty. There's so much information out there on how you bring out the best in a different personality type. Some people are like, get to the point. Other people, you need to take the time to ask them how they are and how's the family.
That's right.
That's important to them. A little bit of consideration. Thank people. Thank people anyway, because usually the people at the top are very driven and very choleric, very, a personality, but that's not necessarily going to serve us well. And take the time to learn and to thank them and to care. And even when they're difficult, and this is what I found in prison, Felicia, everybody's there. You think that's just those people tucked away over here. But there are people in prison who were CEOs of major companies, who were accountants, who were lawyers, yes, who were, they are all there. Now, granted, the majority are from disadvantaged, low socioeconomic areas, but not everyone. Okay. And one thing I know is every person wants to feel significant and cared about, no matter how tough they are. And whether you're in the corporate world or volunteering at a soup kitchen, which wouldn't hurt you to do, that will actually help develop your personality too, is to take your posh stuff off and go and get dirty and help out somewhere. But this is what I found. When I went into prison, I don't come from disadvantage, Felicia. Yes, we lost everything, but I was brought up, I was well educated. I spoke well. I'm articulate. I'm well read. It actually created a problem for me in there because they thought I was better than them.
I could see that.
And it was an us and them thing.
Right.
And then as I got to know them, I realized that there is no us and them. They is us and I is them. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. We all want to be loved. We've all got a history. We've all got a story. And as I got to know people individually, instead of judging them and making assessments about them, I learned to ask them what their thoughts were about things.
Right.
And you would be surprised at the insights. I shared a cell with a lady who was so smart. She was so clear. The other prisoners would bring their lawyers' letters to her. She would read, she put her glasses on and she would read it. She would read it And she'd say, right, so this means this. And she said, so when you talk to your lawyer, you tell them this and this, and you ask for this and that.
Wow.
And they went, thank you very much. And often, next. It was like one of those John Grisham books, those movies where in the jail where they come and do that. I was in awe of her.
Yeah.
She was a heroin addict, and she was in prison because of it. And she just had to steal money to get more drugs.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So she walked both sides of the fence. She lived the life of the well-educated, but she also lived the life of getting into trouble. And so on some level, she did relate to the other young ladies that were there.
Well, she cared about them. And
very nice.
And I did too, because when you hear someone's story, then it changes how you see them. And a lot of that reduces a lot of the angst.
That's right. I think people on the outside see it as black and white. You're bad, you're arrested, you're good, you're not arrested. But it's not that simple at all. There's all those shades of gray in between as to how people step into the wrong place and setting. So yeah, you're very wise to do that. And I love your concept of humility, because yes, we all have to look at ourselves sometimes and, hey, what are my flaws? Flaws? I don't have any flaws. What are you talking about? But we really have to take an honest look at ourselves. And then when you do that and you are better in the workplace, that also carries over in how you interact with everyone, even in your personal realm, even in your let's say, middle management, your line workers, and then on out to the family. But perhaps you shed a little bit about how that relates to your relationship with the workers. What's the benefit of it? How do they improve when you treat them a little more personable, and how that might carry over at home? Maybe we can touch on that later. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, your staff, your middle managers take their cue from you. They take their cue from you. When Richard Branson owned Virgin Airlines, the whole flavor of the airline was fun and enjoyable, and you would go on and they'd crack jokes with you, and it was just a really pleasurable experience because it filtered down from the top about that customer service. Right. Now, a few years ago, I was on one of their flights, and it was no longer about the fun. It was about the security and the safety and the mistrust and, treating people like I felt that customer service was so bad that I felt like I was being treated like I was under suspicion, because they're so about safety and security. And when my carry-on was too heavy, it was as though I'd committed a cardinal sin and I was trying to do something really bad. And I went, it's okay. It's all right. All I did was take some books out and put them in my pockets because I had a coat on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we're fine.
Right.
But it was so bad because the leadership changed.
Right.
And it became more about and I know how this happens. It becomes the way people talk about their customers, it filters through.
Yeah.
So clearly there had become a culture of fear and suspicion and nuisance, that these customers are a nuisance. They're trying to get away with bringing on too much stuff. Wow. And the size of me, they have I might have a slightly overweight bag, but if I had been 300 kilos, Felicia,
you still would have
a small bag. I mean, it wouldn't have been an issue. So there's legalism. It's just crazy. So your relationship with your leaders will flow on, but you need to consciously talk about it. Talk about that culture. I was the president of an organization called Seroptimist International. We were chartering a new chapter. I wasn't the first leader, I don't think. I think I was the second one. And we needed to build numbers, we needed to get our numbers up. And so we constantly talked about our culture and being friendly and inviting people. And our club is one of the only clubs in our current organization that is still growing when lots of associations are losing members.
You gave it the personal touch, that you let them know they were worthy and you wanted them there. You made them
and we
feel
talked
wanted.
about that. Yeah, we talked about this is our culture. This is how we talk. This is how we don't talk. These are the things we don't say. So you spell it out, and you will build a culture in your workplace that is healthy. Now, when you're in jail, like you can make your workplace feel like a prison.
Well, that's true. Yes,
When you're
I'm
full
sure.
of suspicion, and are your staff fearful of bringing a problem to your leaders?
Wow.
Do your leaders filter what they tell you, and how would you know? Do they put their spin on it? Do they take the credit for someone further down to impress you?
Good
And
point.
how would you know? How would you know? You would know if you were someone who walked the floor and actually talked to those who are underneath that middle management. And this goes for middle management as well,
Yeah.
that you're not a school teacher, you're not a parent, you're not a prison warden.
Right. Very good points. Very good points. Wow. And I think sometimes maybe CEOs get lost sight of it because they're so concerned about the outside pressures they have, and as well as meeting their deadlines. And so they tend to maybe forget to be personal with. And a lot has to do with your personality to begin with. But it's sort of like reminds me of that program in America. I don't know if you have it in Australia, the Undercover Boss.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah, that's where it's a lot of what you're speaking about, is to get in there and know what's going on in your own company. It's so important.
Just such an eye-opener. I mean, some things are different in America than Australia. We wouldn't get away with, it would just be illegal, some of the conditions that
Oh my gosh.
Americans put up with than what we have here.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how their eyes are opened and what's expected to happen, and people
That's
who
right.
can have a full-time job and still be homeless, living in a shelter or their car.
That's
It's
right.
like, what's with that?
I've seen some of those episodes. It's amazing, but it just goes to show that much more that the bosses need to listen to you when you talk about humility, relationships with them, relating to them, and resiliency in yourself in order to bring it out in them as well. Yeah,
It really does. And here's something else I found, Felicia. You know, he who waters is watered himself, is an old saying. And I knew that my number one danger was not Big Bertha. It was self-pity and self-righteousness, feeling like this is not fair. I shouldn't be here, and spiraling into self-pity.
Well,
I was aware that that's not healthy, and I knew that I had to focus elsewhere. And so I became someone to encourage other people. You know, I'm a rescuer by nature, which is why I got into trouble in the first place. I felt like I needed to fix a problem that wasn't mine to fix. So boundaries are important. Boundaries are very important.
Got that right.
Along with the self-care and knowing when to say, look, when you're busy, you do need to slot out, okay, if I'm going to take this on, something else has to be removed or delegated or redone. If you're still making your son's lunch at 15, you're doing it wrong. That's right. You should not be. So you should not be doing tasks as a leader.
I got you there.
When something new program comes in, something else has to go, because that's where we get cluttered. Women particularly tend to keep taking on stuff without letting go. So when you see other people differently, how else can I see this person? And you become an encourager, not just, hey, good on you, you're doing great, but saying, wow, that must have been really tough.
Wow.
Just caring, just being focused on someone else and encouraging them, giving them a kind word. It doesn't take too much time. Then what that actually does, and there's science behind this, Felicia, you would know this in your profession, there's science behind when you speak life to someone.
That's right.
It does something healthy in your brain, in your thinking, in your brain, and you feel better.
And you also see the person lift up. I've seen people that are shoulders are down, and you just give them one compliment and their shoulders are back up again and they're back in the race. And I mean, most of these people are so beaten down that, yes, we all need to reach out our hand. But in big business especially, it's no different in a company for workers. They're beholden to that chief officer to come in and give them a compliment once in a while.
Yeah, and notice them. Notice them. Felicia, the most frightening thing, would you like me to tell you the most frightening thing that happened to me in prison?
If you don't mind sharing it with
I
us,
will.
the audience
And I'll tell you, the same thing is happening in companies all over the world. The same frightening experience. So I was moved to the minimum security place, and I was sitting in front of the head warden there, who was doing an induction. She was going through her form and ticking boxes, assessing me.
Right.
She's asking me questions. She's ticking her boxes. I'm responding. I'm trying to engage because I know that my time there could be hard or it could be not so hard. And so I'm pretty good at connecting with people, and I'm doing my best, and I'm maybe suggesting perhaps I could help with literacy. Perhaps I really want. I'm trying to show her who I am.
Right.
And she's making notes, barely looking at me, except to look at me in a way that was assessing. And I became aware. I felt the blood drain from my face as I became aware that even though her eyes were pointed this way, she didn't see me.
No.
All she could see was offender D42586.
Right.
D42586.
A surface evaluation. Yeah.
And assessing whether I was a threat or not.
Wow.
I was invisible. Yeah. And Felicia, if something had happened to me, I would be an incident report.
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, in jail, that's exactly true. There's no personalization. There's no rehabilitation. Someone asked me that. Is anybody really rehabilitated in jail? Not necessarily, no. Very rare stories you hear once in a while where someone went through education, did something within the walls, but it's very, very hard to do because every day you're moving forward and somebody else pulling you back by the pants. Another inmate.
Yeah, there are a number of programs that they put people through, and then there's that culture. But as a leader, doesn't that happen in the corporate world as well?
Yeah,
that you might have somebody in front of you who might have made a mistake, and you've got to correct them. So what's in your mind while you're talking to them? Is it your agenda? Is it your frustration at the problem that they caused? Are they getting a vibe from you that is indifferent, not indifferent, that is cold, is annoyed? Do they feel your annoyance? When someone is afraid, they're in front of you and they're afraid, they're going to tell you whatever you want to hear. And is that going to solve the problem? They're not listening to how they can improve. So you've got to ask yourself, am I looking at a person or a problem? And be aware of that and put that aside. Put your checklist and incident report aside and say, hey, what's going on in your world? How can we help?
Yeah, it takes a really confident leader to do that. Hopefully, many pick up those skills along the way, but there's no particular training in business school on how to talk to an aberrant or an angry or a defeated employee. And so that's the problem. And you don't always expect it either, but you're so right, though, to make you feel insignificant. It's probably the worst thing you can do to another human being, I think.
Well, yeah, that's right. But, of course, they can learn it. Yeah. They can hire me to come in and teach them. And
for speaking, yes. And,
yeah,
definitely. But I could go on and on with you. I just think your life story is so fascinating. But I'd like to know, since I work with relationships of all kinds as well, how would you merge those trends, or how would you compare them when you're talking about coming home to the family at night? I mean, it's the same thing with your loved ones. How do you treat them? Do you treat, how do you see that merging into your personal life using resilience and humility?
Yeah, well, look, that was harder because they're closest to me. We tend to react and lose our cool and with the people that love us the most, and that's tough. And so when I came home, it was as though I'd inhaled for 8 months, and when I exhaled, I just fell in pieces. So there was a time where I just wanted to go to bed for the rest of my life. And there were some days where I did hop into bed, pull the covers over, and I spent my day there, or half a day, because it was all too much.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I realized that if I were to stay, and that's self-pity as well. And it was PTSD. I didn't know I had PTSD till it was diagnosed a little bit later, and I'm okay now.
And
I've had help for that.
Yeah.
But I manage things carefully. I manage my world so that I stay resilient. And that's what we all have to do, is manage that. But at that point in my relationship with my family, I knew, as I did before I went to prison, I made a decision that I had 3 little girls who needed their mummy to be able to function.
Yeah, sure.
And a husband who stood by me, thank goodness.
Yeah, that's a blessing.
I honestly don't know if I would have coped as well if he'd said, "See you later, love."
That's a blessing.
I can't say.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
But I had to model for them the theories that I had believed about, leadership and coping and doing things. I had to model for them right thinking and speaking. And I didn't always succeed, but before I went in, I would not lose my temper in front of them. I would go for a drive and scream and cry by myself.
Yeah,
and then come back. And I did see a therapist, and I did get some medication to help me. I did it then. Coming home, I knew I needed to see someone to get some help. There's no shame in that. And that helped. And taking my time. But with your family, you've got to understand they don't have to love you. You can't just, there's this idea that, they love me, so they have to put up with me. They don't.
Right.
They don't. And that's how families break up. So you've got to ask what's important to you and how important are they? Because I'll tell you, they are infinitely important because they are human beings.
Right. Yeah, there are significant.
And their future, you have control. You have influence over how they cope and how they grow. And I knew that I had to get help and get well, because if I didn't, I would poison the next generation.
Wow.
With my dysfunction.
Deep thinking, yes. I don't know that so many people think as far deeply as you do. That's good.
Well,
your part.
It's all I thought about. I had 3 little girls who were 10 and 7 because they're twins. Chelsea had turned 11 while I was in prison, and it was helpful to me. It was good that I realized that I needed to pour into them. I needed to get well. Sometimes we'll let ourselves go, but for the people that you love. And my husband deserved to have a wife fully functioning. He'd suffered too.
Sure.
And he'd had to give up his real estate job because he had to look after the girls. He had to get a different sort of a job and find income, as well as grieve over his missing wife and his feeling of, I should have. And look, it is a man thing to want to protect and rescue. And he said to my lawyers, he had said to them, "Can I go in instead of her?" Oh,
wow. That's love. That's so sacrificial. Oh,
it really is. And of course he couldn't. And he's way too pretty to go into a men's prison. He's a spunky thing.
But you're a lucky woman.
Yeah. And so he stood by me. And I knew I did not have the right to turn on him, even though I had all this frustration and the PTSD and I felt this incredible anger, which I realize now was railing against an institution, because it's damaging. But who do you go mad at?
Right. Well,
how do you pinpoint somebody? What one person can you blame? That's a frustrating thing. So I did get help. And once again, when I returned to those 3 questions, how else can I see this? That changed everything. How else could I view this? And that's when I realized that I could publish my books. I had written manuscripts. I'd written a book on fraud warning signals before I went in, because I thought, I don't want this to happen to anyone else.
Fraud and finance, you mean?
Yeah. That's I've got 2. One's for women, and then there's a gender neutral version, which are on my website, also on Amazon.
Weapons of Mass Destruction. I love that title. Yeah. Love it.
Protect your fortune from fraud.
Right.
And then the women. Both of these books are about what you need to know before you invest your finance or your heart. So it's about relationships as well.
Women.
Now, mine wasn't a romance, but I couldn't avoid that. That's often the case with people, because when they have a relationship with someone, they trust them. I also had my letters and my journal entries while I was incarcerated.
Oh, wow. They're all interesting.
That is because in every adversity, there is treasure to be found if you look at it
You look for it.
differently.
Yeah, you look your perspective. Yeah.
And
that's
because of that, I had to think, what will I do with my life? Because I wasn't employable. I had a criminal record. So I began to, it was scary.
Yeah, of course, that's, you don't think of that. You're left with that afterwards. So I love the way you said you have to shift your perspective, because that's actually the title of all the work you do, isn't it?
Shift and lift.
Shift and lift. That's right.
Yep.
So
shift and lift.
Shift and lift. And so you really sum it all up in both your personal life, your journey, and how it impacts even the business world. So you really are someone who walks his talk. Okay. A lot of times we hear people say certain things or lecture certain topics, and then they don't do any of it themselves. But you are speaking from really personal experience. You're speaking from the heart. And I think we all felt that. I know I did. But I think our public would like to know where we could get your books, because they look so interesting.
Yes. Well, my website is speakertrishjenkins.com.
Okay.
So I have a store there, and they're on Amazon as well.
Oh, on him. Okay.
Yep. So but if you do pick up one of my books, shoot me a note and let me know, and I'll say g'day.
They sound so wonderful. But let's leave our readers here. So if they would be all interested in hiring you to hear a little bit more in depth of you in person, because you're really a great speaker. So as I said, you speak from the soul, from the heart. So if you were to be hired, they can get you at your website. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
They can contact me through my website, which is speakertrishjenkins.com.
Okay.
They can watch me on YouTube. It's just youtube.com. Trish Jenkins, my name.
Okay.
And I also do ministry as well, which is a separate market for me. But because, as I mentioned before, I'm a faith person. I minister from my story out of Romans 8:28, that God makes all things work together for our good, and it brings a word of encouragement and empowerment, and finding treasures in the darkness to turn things around. So similar messages. It's just one's got a bit more of a backstory through it.
Well, I just think you're remarkable, and I will leave all the websites in the film at the end of this video for the viewers to be able to get in touch with you if they didn't pick up your. But you have Trish Jenkins right there on the screen. You have speakertrishjenkins.com. That's her website. So by all means, they're there, and we're going to give you a lot more. Thank you so much. I think your words of wisdom and your sincerity and genuineness comes through. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.